The world of magic is filled with simple tricks, like guessing cards or pulling a coin from behind your ear. However, the tricks that make you famous are the ones that surround you with danger. But with danger comes risk, and with risk can come horrific and often fatal outcomes. That's exactly what we'll be discussing in today's video on the top 10 worst magician injuries. Magicians who play with death are often focused on one thing: building suspense. And what's the simplest way to do that? Well, for Chung it was catching a bullet that was fired directly at him. Fortunately, the trick was just an illusion. The guns were rigged so that no real bullets would be fired, and Chung would reveal bullets hidden on his body, giving the impression that he had actually caught one. However, in 1918, during a performance at the Greenwood Empire in London, things went terribly wrong. The guns weren't rigged properly and a real bullet was fired. It struck Chung in the chest, and by the next morning, he was dead. But this is just one of 10 magicians who pushed their tricks too far. From dancing through a crowd of flaming assistants to being pummeled by falling swords, the stories only get crazier from here. Braden, better known by his stage name Janista, was like many magicians before and after him. He fell in love with the craft at a young age, and he was inspired by the great Houdini. Because of this, he sought to imitate one of Houdini's most famous tricks, which involved escaping from a milk canister that was filled to the brim with water and locked at the top. Though the canister was locked, the top section could be pushed off with enough force in case the magician couldn't escape. However, when Janista attempted the trick in 1890, the canister had been dropped earlier that day, damaging it and making it impossible to open. And so, as his assistants watched calmly, unaware of the danger, and the audience sat in suspense, Janista slowly drowned, dying alone in the dark confines of the water-filled milk can. Next, we have the first female magician on the list, but don't be fooled by her gender, because Princess Tango, also known as Tango Hikita, is one of the bravest and toughest magicians out there. Princess Tango gained global fame in the early 2000s for her spike illusion in the face of death trick. In this act, she would attempt to escape from a box while 10 swords were suspended above her. The idea was that she would escape before the swords dropped, but in 2007, a mechanical failure caused the swords to fall early. Fortunately, they were blunt, but that didn't stop Princess Tango from being pummeled by the heavy swords, leaving her with bruises and several broken ribs. Did that stop her though? Absolutely not. The show must go on. So she finished her performance and was back on stage just a week later. Like others on this list, Burus was inspired by the great Houdini, and so he would constantly push the limits. In October 1990, with Halloween just around the corner, he decided to push those limits once again, but this time it would be too far. While performing in Fresno, California, Joseph was placed in chains and then put into a glass coffin that was lowered 7 feet into the ground. As he was lowered, the chains around his neck began to tighten and suffocate him, but that wasn't even his biggest problem, because just a few moments later, a truck began to fill the hole around the coffin with cement. While Joseph struggled with the chains, the cement's weight caused the glass coffin to shatter, crushing him to death. Next up, we have Johan Mle, a Swedish magician who is nationally known as Balabrega. He gained fame for his iconic flaming moth trick. The trick was simple. Balabrega would dress 6 of his assistants in moth-like costumes, cover them in gas, and then set them on fire. Simple trick, right? Then, as his assistants danced in what appeared to be chaotic frenzy, Balabrega would navigate through the chaos. While dangerous, the act was actually carefully calculated and choreographed, and so Johan and his assistants were rarely in actual danger. That was, of course, until Brazil in 1900. During that trip, Balabrega performed at a small theater that wasn't equipped for his usual performance. He was then forced to replace the gas he typically used with acetylene. Acetylene is more explosive than natural gas because of its higher energy content, wider flammability range, and greater chemical instability. So when Balabrega lit his assistant on fire, she exploded immediately, killing both of them on the spot. Jeff Rayburn Hopper was a young magician, brimming with ambition and a desire to make his mark on the world. In 1984, he decided to create something unique for an upcoming performance. To do this, Jeff and his team traveled to Winona Lake in Indiana. There, he asked his teammate to handcuff him and secure him with chains before throwing him into the water. The plan was simple. Jeff would use his lock-picking skills and flexible body to escape the handcuffs and the chains. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. Despite his best efforts, the young Jeff Hopper, only 23 at the time, drowned and died before he could even make it to his performance. The story of Charles Rowan, also known as Car the Magician, is both incredibly intense and equally as tragic. Born in South Africa, Charles had a knack for blending magic with daring stunts. His most famous act involved escaping from a straitjacket while Car sped towards him. To perform this stunt, Car would have his team chain him up in a straitjacket, then a car would drive at him, full speed. Like many other performances on this list, the idea was that Car would escape from the straitjacket and move out of the way, seemingly just in time. Unfortunately, the intensity of the act was so overwhelming that it triggered a heart attack, resulting in Carr being struck and dying on the spot. At this point, it kind of seems that water is the biggest enemy of magicians, so you would think that magicians would look to history and rethink tricks involving water. However, for Chancha Leiri, this wasn't the case. As recently as 2019, the magician had his team chain him up, blindfold him, place him in a cage, then lower that cage into the water. Once again, the plan was for him to escape and the show would go on with rigorous applause. That did not happen. Chanchal's team waited and the crowd waited, but he never surfaced. Tragically, like many magicians before him, Chanchal had drowned and died. As discussed earlier in the video, bullets are a simple and effective way to build suspense when performing in front of an audience. This is why Madame Dolinsky and her husband, who was also a magician, would have a firing squad line up in front of them and shoot during their performances. Naturally, the guns were supposed to contain blanks so that no real bullets were fired. However, during a performance in 1820, a live round was mistakenly loaded into the chamber. As a result, a stray bullet lodged itself in Madame Dolinsky's stomach. Her husband did everything he could to get her the help she needed, but it wasn't enough to save her. She died just a few days later. Now, the last magician on the list, Sigman Newberger. In 1911, Sigmund went on a tour around England to perform his most iconic trick, the Lion's Bride. The trick would span 25 minutes and include a horse, a real lion, multiple actors, and naturally, a beautiful female assistant. The sheer scale of the trick also required a large amount of props and equipment, in particular, candle lamps. During a performance in 1911, one of the lamps toppled over, causing the entire set to be engulfed in fire within just a few moments. Fortunately, Sigmund escaped unharmed. So why is he on the list then? Well, in a true moment of bravery, Sigmund rushed back into the burning building to save his horse. However, it was here that he became trapped, and alongside 10 other members of his team, died a brutal and fiery death. Well, there it is, the 10 worst magician injuries in history that I could find. I'm supposed to ask you a question like, which one did you find the craziest? But people died. I can't do that. Let me know in the comments if you liked this video or you want to watch something similar. If you want a less crazy video, something a bit more lighthearted, click right here. And please subscribe if you like my stuff. Bye!